Testament writers use a lot of different word pictures to describe the church. And you've heard the phrase, a picture tells 1,000 words. I think it applies to a word picture as well. Okay, that's why they do that. And so when the church, the followers of Jesus, are referred to as a flock, it tells us something, right? We can unpack that, but we can just talk about a flock of sheep, and it communicates in a way that you don't have to say the whole explanation every time, right? We come to be familiar with that picture, that as a flock of sheep we follow our shepherd. Okay? That as if Jesus is our shepherd, he guides us and protects us. And so that meaning is just built into talking about the church as a flock. That we're reminded of our relationship with Jesus as the shepherd. There could be other senses that we give to that as well, but there's a lot of them in the New Testament. And so we have a few up here on the screen. You'll notice that a flock is not up there. Okay? So this is hardly exhaustive. But these are perhaps some of the more familiar word pictures. So I put those all up there because as we look at 3 John, which is a very short letter, what we find is we get a real life look at relationships. And so relationships in the early church. And so the metaphor here of family is one that comes to the fore, okay, in this letter of 3 John. But doesn't mean that that's a better metaphor than any of those other ones that are up there. They just have specific meanings and applications. And so, as I said, this letter focuses on family, and we can keep that in mind as we work through. Although it seems that the shortest book in the Bible could be written on a post-it note, I did an experiment and it can't. That's just the first few verses there. But that's really what it is. We don't know exactly how it worked, whether it was sent on its own, years separated from 1 John. But it could have been like a post-it note on 1 John as that was sent around. We don't know the relationship between all of these letters and the timing of them. But John writes this letter as someone with authority. He is the elder. Okay? Now, as I mentioned last week, is he John the Apostle? We can't be absolutely certain, but that is certainly the tradition, and there's no real reason to deviate from that. And so John is an apostle. He calls himself the elder, and he's writing this to one person. 1 John was written to a group of churches. It was a general letter. It was for anyone who came across it. It would benefit them and bless them. And I hope you experienced that as we work through it. 2 John is a letter that is written to a particular congregation. Okay? They're going through some difficulties. Whether it's the same congregation as 1 John or amongst those, we don't know, but to a particular church dealing with their their struggles and encouraging them very, very briefly. And this one is written to an individual. Okay? There are other letters in the New Testament that are written to individuals. If you're Timothy, the two Timothys and Titus are both written to individuals. But we know a little bit about Timothy and Titus. We don't know anything about Gaius. We don't know whether, we presume he's a leader in a church, but we don't know that. We don't know where the church is. He's, other than this name, he's anonymous to us. But we can discern some things about him. We might say, how is this letter to a random person in a random church 2,000, 1,900 years ago, how is that relevant to us? Right? It doesn't really contain eternal truths. Right? If you think back to the Gospel of John, in the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was God. It's like, right? Jesus was with God, and Jesus was God. That catches your attention. It blows your mind. It's like, that's a bold claim, isn't it? And so you got to dwell on that. You got to think on that. And it's this universal statement that anyone in the world can try to figure out. Okay? Is it true? Why is it important? Why did John tell us that at the beginning? But this letter is written to a random person. My dear friend Gaius, whom I love in the truth. Okay, so in the truth means as a Christian, as a follower of Christ. Gaius is someone that he respects. Okay? Someone that he cares about and loves. And so what does he have to say to this friend? What's going on in this friend's life that prompts John, probably a very elderly John at this point in his life? John actually still doesn't need too many words to get us thinking. Okay? You might go, well, verse 1, that's kind of vanilla. Okay? The elder, a person we don't know, writing to Gaius, a person we don't know. Okay, that's good. You're friends. Okay? That's verse 1. We'll get that out of the way. There's not a lot there for us to work through. But when we come to verse 2, all of a sudden it catches us. Right? Verse 2 challenges us. One translation you can see at the bottom of the screen there writes it this way: I pray that all is going well with you, and that you are every bit as healthy physically as you are spiritually. I want you to think about that for a moment. Is this a blessing? Or could it be a curse? How would it work for you? If somebody said to you, I wish you were as well physically as you are spiritually, and then it came true, how would you walk out of here today? Right? Would we need a row of wheelchairs? Will we need stretchers? Are we calling 911? Or are we suddenly sliding down the banisters? Running out there. Dunking on the basketball hoop on the way to our car. Right? Because our bodies have come in sync with our spiritual health. Now, I'm sure that Gaius took it as a blessing, right? Because he says, I love you in the truth. Okay? And so he knows that he's healthy spiritually. And he says, I hope that you're as physically healthy as you are, because I know you're spiritually healthy. But I think it's a good question for us to think about. This is a reflection off a building, but it reminds me of those mirrors, that make a tall person short and a short person tall and all of that. And so what it sort of does is take who we are and show us as something different. And so if we had that mirror that said, this is a soul mirror, right? Not because it plays soul music, but because it exposes the soul and forms your body based on what you see in the mirror is how you're doing spiritually. Is the health of your soul. And I wonder what that would look like for us. So I think catches us right there at the start. He feels very comfortable. Think, who would you feel comfortable saying that to? I hope that you're as well spiritually, physically, as you are spiritually. And who would you have reservations about saying that? Because if there are people you have reservations about, maybe you need to say some other things to them. Some other types of encouragement to nourish their soul. And so with that greeting out of the way, the letter turns to praising Gaius for the things that he's doing well. And the first one is faithfulness to the truth. Okay? Faithfulness to the truth. It gave me great joy in verse 3 when some believers came and testified about your faithfulness to the truth. Okay. So, this is a letter about traveling as well. And so some people have been to see Gaius, and then when they come to John's church, they share about their visit. And they may have been passing through, they may have gone there on purpose, but they come to John's church and they say, we had the best time. Gaius we can confirm that he is like solid. He's faithful to Christ, to the truth. He's committed to following Jesus. And so that leads to the second one, is that he is walking in the truth. Also there in verse 3. We talked a little about this last week, that this picture of walking in the truth is more than just accumulating facts and knowledge. Okay? You can be faithful to the truth. You can be very committed to a spherical earth, right? As opposed to a flat earth. Right? You can just be 110% committed that the earth is not flat. It's a sphere. Okay? And you're faithful to that. That's good to know. Right? I don't know if it changes your life. I mean, for some people it does. But for us, day to day, it really doesn't make a difference whether the earth is round or flat. But it's not just about knowledge. Christianity is not just about knowledge. It's about walking in the truth. About putting legs on the truth. Right? What do we do with that? How does it impact our lives? How does it direct us? And so the first one, I think, there is saying you know the truth. You have to know it. And you be faithful to it, committed to it. You stand up for it, because they were living in a pagan society. I mean, there are a lot of people who were suspicious of them, who would, made life difficult for the Christians. And so it would be easy to go to church on Sunday, right? And then look very much like a pagan the rest of the week. So the question isn't, are you in church on Sunday? The question isn't, have you got your ducks in a row when it comes to your doctrines and your beliefs? That's the starting point. But from there, are you walking in the truth? Is that changing and impacting your life? And what's interesting is that the way that we think about truth, right? I can't speak for everyone, but it's my experience that usually when we think about truth, it is these facts, right? It's what you learned in history class. Right? Doesn't mean you remember them, but you learned them at some point. You passed that test. You knew the facts. You knew the truths. Right? And then some of them, it's important to know. You got to walk in them. There's someone in my household that's suddenly taking an interest in the rules of the road. And it's one thing to know the rules of the road. It's another thing to walk in them. Okay. But it's not just about the truth as a fact. I want you to pay attention to what it is that Gaius does. In verse 5. Dear friend, you are faithful in what you are doing for the brothers and sisters, even though they are strangers to you. They have told the church about your love. Please send them on their way in a manner that honors God. So it seems that what is happening is that in that day and time, there was no Motel 6 leaving the lights on. And so when Christians were traveling, whether it be, and it refers here to really to missionaries, to teachers who are traveling around trying to spread the good news of Jesus. But it could also be for business. Right? So without a Motel 6 or a Hilton or whatever it was, then they still needed somewhere to stay. And if other people knew they were a Christian, there was no guarantee that they'd be welcome. So, a big part of walking in the truth was how you treated other people. So, what is there's no fact to know here. There's nothing, no commandment that says open your doors to Christian travelers. Right? Jesus never said that. But walking in the truth means that you will show hospitality to Christian travelers. Walking in the truth means that you'll have a guest room available. I don't know if they had a guest room or just another mat on the floor, but whatever it was, right, you had something available. You turn down the sheets, you put a mint on the pillow, you make sure there are fresh towels, right? That is living in the truth as a follower of Jesus. And you go, well, that's not in the Bible. But it's a reflection of how the church in that century loved each other. You see, when we talk about church as family, right, that metaphor, that image, that picture, what does that mean? Does it just mean we visit people in the hospital? Or send them a card? It can mean that. Include that. But walking in the truth can look like a lot of different things that have nothing to do with facts and doctrines. It's about how we treat one another. How the Holy Spirit is transforming us, is softening our hearts, is building empathy towards one another and those in need. Because Christ showed that same love to people, didn't he? Because he didn't have a house. He couldn't open his doors. But what did Christ do that was perhaps an equivalent of this? Did he show hospitality? Did he feed strangers? Yeah? Did he heal people? Did he raise people from the dead when their families were struggling? So hospitality here is more than just saying, oh, come into my guest room. It's really saying, come into my life. Let me encourage you. Let me help you. Let me care for you. You're not alone. And so we can do that, can't we? We can say to each other, you're not alone. And we can do things to communicate that, to demonstrate that. And so it changes the dynamic of what the truth is. Because there can be churches that have their hospitality, their faithfulness to the truth. They got that down. They know the facts. But you go visit there, you walk in, you walk out. No one says hello to you. Right? They all go, everybody, I'm picturing a small church, not a mega church, but everybody goes off to lunch and you're sort of there in the parking lot and you're thinking, oh, now what happens? That church is very confident in their truth. But I think John would say, hey, you're not really living that. You're not welcoming people into your lives and making space for them. And that's what Gaius was doing well. Because when we look at all of these, it comes back to demonstrating love. This series, we've had the I love you up there the whole way through. Because for John, we can't separate the love that God has for us, the love that we have for God, the love that we have for one another. He takes the idea of family, I think, much more literally than we do. Because for us, it's often like an intellectual sort of thing. If I was to say, hey, we're having a family lunch today, how do you understand that? Probably that Julie, Sophie, and I are going to have lunch together. Huh? Would you think you were invited? Right. Right? We're having a family lunch. That means you're not invited. If you're invited, we'll say we're having a church lunch. But John says they're the same thing. Right? He takes it very literally. And we go, oh, that's a nice metaphor. It makes me feel warm and fuzzy. John says, no, put it into action. How are you showing that love to other people? And let's start with who's in the room. Because if you can't do it here, okay, how are you going to do it with other people? And so I think he he gives us something to think about what it means to be family, what it means to be faithful to the truth, and what it means to demonstrate love. Truth has to be expressed through love, or else it's not true. Truth can be a lot of things. It can be helping someone, sharing a meal, helping out with a repair or advice when somebody's looking for assistance. Perhaps it's visiting someone's business or hiring someone in the church to do a job for you because that's what their business is. Supporting one another. And all of that can be truth. Yeah? And so we have these two, one author describes it as the two arms of Christ. Truth and love. Yeah? And so sometimes we go to this side and we're all about, you've got to have the truth. You've got to agree with me on the teaching. You've got to get this straight. And on the other side, though, we can go, it's all about the love. And then, whatever, as long as you like God. As long as you think there is a God and you're a good person. And so it's the truth and the love that go together. We need to be like Gaius and incorporate both of those into our lives, individually and as a church. He goes on and talks about the negative example, the conflict perhaps that's happening in the church there. And we see there that one of the signs of this conflict is that not accepting guests, not accepting other people into their lives. It's like, nope, I control what's said, I control what's taught, I'm in charge here. And so truth and love, it doesn't build walls. It expands, welcomes people, and sends them on their way as servants of God. That's what our challenge is, right? That we are Christians, we are children of God, that we welcome people in, care for them, serve them, love them, and send them on their way as children of God. And that is truth.